But if you notice on the syllabus next week, we're going to talk about racial and ethnic inequality, and then gender inequality, and the week after that, sex and sexual orientation and inequality related to that. So we've got several weeks of the same kind of big topic, but with some, each week is a specific dimension of inequality. So this is where we start the notes for anyone who did print them out. If you notice the lecture outlines were available this morning, and so if you want to use them, great. If you don't, that's fine too. So social inequality. When we are talking about inequality, we are talking about an unequal distribution of resources, services, or positions in society. That's the general inequality. So there can be racial and ethnic inequality when certain racial groups don't get the same access to jobs or services that other people in society have access to. What we're going to focus on today is a specific kind of inequality called economic inequality, where the resources that we're talking about is money, right, or wealth or income. So economic inequality is the income or wealth gap among individuals, groups, and societies. An income or wealth gap. So that could be, if you compare me to Jeff Bezos, right, like there's a lot of economic inequality there, right? The income gap between us and the wealth gap is very significant. But you could also compare like entire countries, right? We talk about wealthy countries and poorer countries, right? So there's a huge wealth gap between the United States and Somalia, right? Or we could talk about different groups. Do you remember the 1% that everyone talks about, right? And the economic inequality between the 1% and the 99%, and right. So we can talk about economic inequality in almost any relative area, like size, small individuals or the large scale. What sociologists tend to focus on when they study inequality is this concept of stratification. When something is stratified, it means it has layers. And in our case, the social stratification, right, involves layers of people in society, like rankings, like a hierarchy. You know that word, hierarchy, right? A ranking of individuals into social groups. Usually, in most human societies, a person's ranking, a person's level on the ladder, if you will, or the layer that they're in, is determined on the basis of their access to resources. That could be material goods like money or land or cars and things like that. Or it could be the resources like prestige or power, like those kind of intangible things that are valuable in society. And so every society, and I'm fairly confident in saying every human society ever that was more than one person, hence being a society, has had some kind of stratification system, right? It's not always a strict hierarchy with one person at the top and all the peasants below. There have been lots of other kinds of systems over history, but human beings tend to want to organize things into categories. That's what our brains do, and so we categorize ourselves often. So there have been historically lots of different kinds of stratification systems. I'm not going to go through every single one, but the ones that we're most familiar with. So slavery is a stratification system. Of course, slavery is a system where some members of the hierarchy or the system own other humans as property. Usually in a slavery-based system, once you are in the category of slave, it is very difficult to move out of that status. And especially in the case of the United States, the period of slavery here, but also in many other places, slavery's status is often based on a person's race or ethnicity. Not always, but often. And so, of course, slavery is a very strict system, a very rigid system, and one that most modern societies look down upon as sort of a more basic kind of stratification system. You can agree or disagree with that view, but I don't think any of this is surprising. I think we all have a general sense of what slavery is, but that is a stratification system where there's at least two classes, right? Well, I don't use the word class, but two groups, slaves and non-slaves. Another type of stratification system that is different, but also has been used and is currently used around the world, is a caste system. In a caste system, your social rank is determined by birth and cannot be changed. You have no control over where you fall in the system. If you are born to high-ranking parents, you are a high-ranking person, right? If you are born towards the bottom, you are stuck at the bottom. And oftentimes those ranks are determined or based on religious or cultural beliefs. Most people who have heard of a caste system associate that with the Hindu caste system in India. That's not, by the way, that's not like the government system. That's a religious system. The government of India does not, put people into castes or anything like that. But it's based on a religious tradition of various groupings, and once you are born into a caste, that is where you remain in your lifetime. Does that one make sense? Another kind of stratification system that evolved out of slavery was kind of one of the earlier ones that evolved into caste systems. We've also used historically something called an estate system, which you may have heard of in high school or whatever as feudalism, right? Where under feudalism there were landowners, they were called lords, and then there were serfs who were like they lived on the land and worked the land, but they didn't own any of it. In feudalism, there were also like classes for the clergy and for knights, but most people were either nobility or serfs, and most people remained where they were born. That doesn't mean that you couldn't change your position. There were sometimes circumstances that would allow people to change their rank, like if you got married, for example, as a poor person, you married a richer person, you got to move up, right? Like if a serf married a nobleman. Similarly, if you leave the nobility or serfdom to pursue pursue the theology and become clergy, you could change your position that way, or if you pursued becoming a knight. But largely, people stayed where they were. Does that one make sense? I'm not going to be going into huge detail like on a quiz or whatever about all this, but I do want to kind of set the stage for where we've come from. So the stratification system that we use in the US, and that is probably most familiar to us, is a class system where your social rank is determined by a variety of factors, which may or may not include your race or what your parents are or whatever. But we like to think our class system is based strictly on educational level, occupation, and income. And largely those are the sort of driving factors of our class system, partly because your education has a huge impact on what occupation you have, and your occupation has a pretty big impact on your income. But the idea of a class system is you are not born, well, you're born somewhere, but once you're born, you have control to a degree to move up and down the ladder, right? Your rank can change. You could win the lottery, right, and move up the ladder, or you could lose your job and move down the ladder, or stay in the same place your whole life, whatever. So in the US, we like to talk about our system, our class system, as being something called a meritocracy. So just like a democracy is a way of life around democratic principles, a meritocracy is a system where the greatest rewards go to people who work the hardest and do the best work. That sounds great. A system where the biggest social rewards go to the people who work hard or are doing good work. The problem is we don't actually live in a meritocracy. The United States is not a meritocracy. If we were a true meritocracy, people who were born rich wouldn't stay rich if they didn't continue to work hard and earn their position, right? We like to tell people that this is what the system we have because it convinces us that if somebody is poor or otherwise lower on the ladder, that it's their fault for not working better or harder. When really what's going on is we have these structural inequalities that prevent certain people or certain types or groups from opportunities to better themselves. And vice versa, we have structural barriers that are like safety nets for many people at the very top, preventing them from falling too far, right? So we like to believe that the United States is a meritocracy, but if that were true, anyone could become rich and anyone could become poor, and we don't really see that happening. It tends to, there are some outliers. People do win the lottery from now and again, but largely there's more going on than just working hard. Fair enough?
Is there an actual term for it, for like our society, or?
Well, that, yes, I think we are an oligarchy, which is basically a country ruled by a few powerful and wealthy leaders. So like the Jeff Bezoses and not just politicians, wealthy people, but that is a personal opinion. And it's somewhat of a political, what people say the word is for our country is a political question. I know you're not trying to set me up, Mallory, but I think of, when there's like a small group of what we call the power elite that really make all the day-to-day decisions of how the country runs, that's an oligarchy. That's the word for that.
Yeah, I agree. I was just asking.
Fair, totally fair. Yes, so anyway, when we talk about the American dream, that's the idea of a meritocracy, right? That anybody can just come and work hard and become successful. And that can happen, but it's not a guarantee, right? You can come and work hard and not be successful, all because of some random structural inequalities that prevent you from doing better. Good. So lots of different systems out there, over time and across the world for dividing people up into their little groups, right? We do still have a class system, despite it not being, a total meritocracy. It's still, people can move up and down. It is largely determined by these three things. Of course, these three things are determined by other things, like where you're born and, your race and all that kind of stuff. But in general, those are stratification systems. There are also two competing theories for why social inequality exists or how it gets perpetuated. And they're kind of opposites, which is what makes sociology really interesting in this area, because for decades there's been these two theories that are kind of competing. So the first one is called social reproduction theory. And like its name implies, this theory believes that our social class system, the system of rich and poor and everything in between, that system gets reproduced from generation to generation. And that, so if you are, if our society is made up of a large lower class and a smaller middle class and a really small upper class, like that old school pyramid of society, middle class or lower class, middle class, upper class. The idea is that a generation later, if you looked at the same society, it would look the same, right? The people moved around a little, but like the same structure is still there. More people on the bottom, fewer people at the top. Does that make sense? And so the way our society and our social class system gets reproduced leads to inequality. So our system of unequal access to resources, our system of unequal access causes economic inequality. What are the resources that we have unequal access to? Things like money, education, nutrition, safe neighborhoods, healthcare, social services, I was going to say food, but nutrition's on there. So we know in our society that some people have access to lots of these things, and some people have no access to those things. And our system causes inequality. So if society always reproduces itself, and we have a system that produces inequality, then the inequality is going to get reproduced every generation, right? And there's always going to be poor people. In and of itself, that's not the problem. The problem is that when people are at the bottom of society, it leads to unequal opportunities for that group. And if that group keeps, for generations, being disadvantaged, right, they never get access to those opportunities. How can we be in a meritocracy if there are certain people who never get access to opportunity? So the general theme of social reproduction theory is like, inequality is bad for society, right? We don't want inequality, but we have a system that causes it, and we keep reproducing it. Give everyone a minute. I don't want to. Sometimes I go too fast, so just let me know if I need to slow down. We're good for now, though. And so, the upper class, when we have a system that produces, upper classes and middle classes and lower classes, the upper classes use their power to make sure that the unequal access to resources continues. Think about it. If you end up at the top, it makes kind of logical sense that you would do everything in your power to make sure you stay at the top, right? I mean, that's kind of a human nature thing, right? And so when people gain power in society, they create laws that benefit themselves and restrict access to opportunities for everybody else. The upper classes use their power to make sure that the unequal access continues by creating laws or rules that benefit themselves and restrict access to opportunities for poorer people. So take, for example, the college entrance cheating scandal that went on last year, and the idea that here are people who are already benefiting from in society, right? Already have access to special resources, money and power, and they use that money and power to benefit themselves or their children, but same class, right? Same idea. And at the same time, those kids who are getting their way bought into school means that it's restricting access to other people who were perhaps deserving, right, of those spaces. And so it makes it even harder for talented and hardworking people to move up in class and contribute all they can. It literally prevents the meritocracy from happening. It makes it harder for talented or hardworking people to move up in social class and contribute all they can. If we have a system where once people get to the top, they turn around and close the door behind them, right, then no one else has the chance to move up. It also secretly works as a safety net so they don't fall down. But and so even somebody who's totally worthy of being, powerful or wealthy or whatever, doesn't have the ability to get up there. And so society ends up losing out because our social class system just gets perpetuated, meaning reproduced, perpetuated. Now, whether you agree or disagree for a moment, does this argument make sense? That we have a system, and it's unequal, and it gets reproduced by the people at the top trying to stay there. So, to see if you maybe do want to subscribe to this, I want to provide you some of the evidence, right? So, if we were using social reproduction theory to examine economic inequality, we are looking for evidence that, first of all, that higher economic inequality levels harm society. So one of the arguments here is that society is losing out when this happens. So we want to look for evidence that high economic inequality levels harm society. We'd want to see evidence that wealthy people make laws that benefit the wealthy and hurt the poor. Have we seen that before? A little bit. We're looking for evidence that talented or hardworking people experience difficulty moving up in social class. I'm sure we can all think of people we know who work hard and are super talented but are stuck somewhere. We look for evidence that people tend to remain in the social class into which they were born. If people stay in the same social class that they were born into, it's evidence that society is not providing enough opportunities for people to move up or down. And the last piece of evidence we would look for is whether people who are born wealthy remain wealthy regardless of how hard they work. And we definitely all can think of examples of where we see that happen. Right? That wealthy people who are born wealthy, they stay wealthy regardless of whether they even, contribute to society. So that's social reproduction theory, that it says, it doesn't explain where the original inequality comes from, but it explains that we have this unequal system and it keeps getting repeated, perpetuated. Because people are making laws that protect themselves, people are stuck in the same social classes for generations, and so on. Does that make sense? The other theory of social inequality is kind of like a flip side, like the other side of a coin. And it's known as the Davis-Moore hypothesis. The Davis-Moore hypothesis is based on functionalism. So if you took intro to sociology, you might remember the structural functionalists, and they were talking about society as an organism with all these parts that contribute to a whole. And the Davis-Moore hypothesis is based on that idea that social conditions exist because they serve a function for the larger society. Social conditions exist because they serve a function for the larger society. In other words, social reproduction theory was saying inequality is bad for society, right? And we lose out. This theory, the Davis-Moore hypothesis, says that inequality is good for society because it ensures that the people who contribute the most to society receive the most rewards. The Davis-Moore hypothesis says, no, it's not about the rich or the powerful protecting themselves and reproducing a structure. No, inequality is a good thing for society because it motivates people to work hard and it allows the most talented to rise to the top and others to fill in the spaces below. You can agree or disagree that happens, but we'll get there in a second. Questions so far? I see there's a question in the chat. I will check that at the break. So it says inequality is good for society. Do you want me to go back? Yeah, no, it's all right. It's all right. Yeah, no worries. Inequality is good for society is what the important part of that is. In this case, because it ensures people who contribute the most get the most rewards. So they believe that Davis and Moore were two sociologists, but they believe that inequality is good for society because it inspires and motivates people to work hard. So think about this, right? If you had to have heart surgery, I presume that you would want that surgery performed by someone who was trained and qualified, a heart surgeon, right? A cardiac surgeon, and not just like a random person. But to become a cardiac surgeon takes years of training, years of schooling, debt, right? A lot of time not wasted, but time spent doing this. It's hard, right? Not everybody's going to want to become a heart surgeon. So to inspire and motivate people to become heart surgeons, as a society, we give them lots of respect and prestige, right? If someone says, "Oh, I'm a cardiac surgeon," you're like, "Wow, that's amazing." We give them money, right? The salaries for surgeons are up there. We give them social rewards to inspire people. Not everyone's going to become a heart surgeon, but it ensures that the critical positions in society are filled by the cream of the crop, the best and brightest. And so by having a little bit of inequality, that's a good thing, because it means that the people who work the hardest will get those higher positions, and it still requires that other positions in society get filled. So like, take trash collecting, for example, right? That's not a very prestigious job, but the pay is actually really good. I admit I haven't done it myself, but I have heard and know others that the pay is decent, right? Because it's a dirty job, because it doesn't have a lot of prestige, we counterbalance that because we know it's critical. The one day trash collecting stops, the world will die, right? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so to motivate people to become trash collectors, right, we pay a decent wage. And so on and so forth. Does that make sense? So the Davis-Moore hypothesis says that inequality is good for society, while the social reproduction theory said it was bad. If we are looking for evidence of this perspective, the Davis-Moore hypothesis, we might look for evidence that economic inequality benefits society. On the last one, we were looking for evidence that it harms society. We might also look for evidence that people who perform lower-level jobs, like fast food workers or entry-level positions, right? We would want to see that those workers are still relatively happy in their jobs, because those jobs are a good fit for them. We would look for evidence that people who carry out the most important tasks gain the most rewards. And I'm going to leave this up, and we would look for evidence that the most talented, hardworking people were regularly entering the most important and difficult occupations, no matter where they started out, no matter whether they were Lori Loughlin's daughter or not. So those are the things we're looking for as evidence that would support the Davis-Moore hypothesis. So I guess I would say, so everybody kind of in sociology would have their own opinion. There is evidence to support the Davis-Moore hypothesis that we can find some of this evidence. We can also find the evidence for the social reproduction theory. So it is kind of up to you which one you think maybe is a better fit for society. There's not a right or wrong answer. Personally, I lean towards social reproduction, but I also understand that it's more like different situations. I see, this coming out, and then other situations I see the other one. So I don't know. We want to talk about that, but yeah.
I think it's both. And I think right now, the more inequality you get, it starts to feel it goes more towards the social reproduction theory. But if you have no inequality, then you start having problems as well.
Right.
There's less motivation. And then I think with the Davis-Moore, what I notice is I feel like it applies both micro and macro level, because there's motivation in social class to work harder, to move up inside that social class. It's easier to move up inside your own social class as well. So like, you perfectly honest, when I was growing up, we were 4 to 48.
Okay.
Lived in the top of my mom's work, where she worked that age. There was a little mini apartment up there,
Yeah.
and that's where we lived. And I grew up, she worked with that tax, the investigation in her apartment, no health care, nothing. And now she's got her own place. She boards animals, takes care of them, does all that kind of stuff. She worked hard to get there. And then same for myself.
Yep.
I worked and started it while I went in the military.
Yeah.
With nothing. And had a job before I went back to school where at one point I was working on which provides for $87,000 a year.
Right.
Without going to school. So it's kind of, I think it is both. And I think without inequality is a problem, but with much is a big problem.
Right.
So it's kind of a give and take. I think eventually, I would imagine that there's going to be a final
The
culmination.
inequality is going to get so big it's going to snap.
Well, correct. But also that both these theories will eventually combine into some solidified theory of world. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that somewhere along the ways, that's what the final turnout is.
That's where we're headed.
That's my opinion.
Yeah. So, and forgive me if I put words in your mouth, but just in case folks couldn't hear very well, the idea that there is evidence, we can see evidence of Davis Moore where people can start out in one social position and work hard and truly do reach another, a higher position in their social class. But at the same time, if there's too much inequality, it becomes like a breaking point. Right, and that's where social reproduction theory picks up, and that you see potentially down the line us having to combine these two because both situations are happening. Excellent. Brenda, do you remember what you wanted to say?
Yeah, I guess what I get confused on is when you talk like a big business, one corporate.
Yeah.
It's individual places, so who is it that determines who's doing the best job and who's not? I mean, it just puzzles me because I remember being a hard worker and stuff, but a lot of it had to do with me being a woman.
Yeah.
That I didn't get ahead.
So are you imagining, like, if we took, let's say, a big corporation, right, and pretended that's like a society, right? And so you've got like entry-level workers and you got the CEO and everybody in between, right? And you're saying, like, in that kind of atmosphere, you didn't feel like there was a lot of ability to move up, right? Is that what you were saying?
I just didn't know how, I always thought we had to work under the same kind of guideline on people, who makes the determination on if they're doing a good enough job or not.
Oh, gotcha, yeah. I mean, every company has it set up in their own way, right? And they've got their standards for what a good worker would be and that kind of thing. Or you're talking about, like, when we say things like the talented, hardworking people should be moving up, right?
Exactly.
And I don't just mean within the company. I mean moving from one, working at one type of company like McDonald's. I'm not talking down to McDonald's as someone who had McDonald's for lunch, last week. And we know they were essential workers and are. But starting there, right, and then if you're a talented hard worker, you're probably going to move on to some other kind of job. And if you do well there, you're probably going to move on to some kind of managerial position. And, even if it's like different companies, you're still moving up a ladder. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
So, okay, awesome. And that's what we would want to see if the Davis-Moore hypothesis is correct. But like you said, there's a lot of structural barriers, including sexism, right, or racism or whatever, and that's where the other theory comes back in. So it sounds to me like you do see elements of both as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was going to add,
Oh, sorry, Charlene, and then whoever was on Zoom.
adding to like talk about the days saying that during that COVID society, like the best and brightest, and then you're talking about like McDonald's and then like our first responders that are kind of for example, like my brother just recently left bringing up the NW of the fire guard and wanted to work closer to home, like kind of fire down at the NW.
Yeah.
So we got a job at Winslow because we recently got a pay
Nice.
So, if, your house is on fire, you're in the car, and called, and, they're now starting to make more things, murders at McDonald's. No hate on that, but,
Right.
who you're gonna call when
Right.
your house is on fire, and they're very well trained and have lots of training. So that's a
Yeah.
critical position, but they don't get paid much.
You're right.
At all, and, they have EMS licenses, and paramedics,
Trainings
A lot of training.
and like keeping those licenses up and. So yeah, so Charlene's saying, just in case anyone can't hear, but a great point, right? Take, for example, emergency responders, police, fire, EMTs, folks like that, right? Where the pay is not great. Maybe just now recently finally starting to realize that, but, and so the idea there, if I was coming at that from a social reproduction theory, I would say that when we don't offer a lot of pay, we try to offer other social rewards. So I would say there's a fair amount of prestige or respect tied to being law enforcement or firefighter or EMT or military. I'm not saying there's a dollar amount on that and it makes up for the pay. Obviously, it does not make up for the pay. Or the hours, or the training that goes into it. And that begs the question, right, is who gets to decide what are the critical positions in society, right?
That was where I was going with that.
Yeah. Like we can say, we know, there's the ones that actually society would grind to a halt if they failed. Garbage collecting, emergency services, food, right, agriculture and things. And then there's the ones that we think are important, like, the stockbrokers and whatever, And I don't have the answer, but I mean, your point is well taken that who's making the decisions about what's the critical and important positions in society? It's the people who are already in the powerful positions, right? And so, are they doing the things that they do and they think that stuff they do is the most important? Probably, right? And I think we saw that very clearly at the beginning of the pandemic when we started having to identify essential workers, the people who had to risk their lives every day. And we liked that for a while, but then we got tired of it, and now we're back to not caring or thinking they're invisible again, right? So, yeah, that's a downer, but I agree with you. Other follow-up? I know somebody else had a question or a comment. No? Oh, yeah, sorry, run ahead.
One point on some of that decision on the critical position, I would say, does rest on the lower costs as well. Entertainers in general, sports.
Oh my God, yes.
When you look at, what is it, page 21 in the book, it talks about upper class and middle and has well cited. But there's not the necessary education. There's nothing in there about
Celebrities, athletes.
Some of that really came out with the pandemic. Okay. Our celebrities were like our first responders and our frontline workers. The celebrities all went home.
Yeah, they were like, it's no big deal, just stay home.
Go home.
Yeah, so I guess the critical position kind of depends on how the people themselves do it too. It's not, yes, the people in power do determine a lot of things, but how we view things as a society as well, the lower class people, and remembering to take care of those people, right? Like the big thing I remember growing up is teacher strike when I was in third grade, and how badly the city treated teachers because of the teacher strike, right? Just how horrible it was. And I can just remember the screaming and yelling, and there was actually counter protests over it. So it was bad, it was ugly. And I can remember that. And it's just like, that's one of the few things I really remember from that time period in my life.
Yeah, single-digit kid, 8 or 9 years old or whatever, yeah.
I mean, and then seeing it still happening today is one of the reasons why I changed my degree and left the field, because I don't want to go into teaching to be treated that way. So,
Right.
So I kind of went in a different direction, hopefully maybe to change those issues. But
So-
I can definitely see that.
That's a great point. And one of the corollaries of that functionalist argument that we reward the people who do the more important positions is you can tell how important something is to a society based on how the rewards. So if you're an alien species looking at the U.S., right, the Kardashians are our leaders. Like, are they not? I mean, prove me wrong. Or athletes, or, right, that what they do for society, entertainment, is more important to us than kindergarten teachers, than first responders, than, whatever. And that is what follows logically from this problem. So we end up in a situation that I think you would all agree that we are in. Yeah, definitely. Other thoughts? I don't want to leave anybody out.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say my fiance is a K-5 public school teacher. I was somewhat naive about the crap that she,
Oh my God, so much work.
and just besieged with stuff once she's home and on the weekend,
Yeah,
out-of-pocket stuff she pays for.
yeah. People don't know, man.
My mother was a public school teacher too, so
Same.
I'm not totally.
I experienced it when I was in America. I had a project in the Boys and Girls Club. It was right during the strikes in 2018. Kids at the Boys and Girls Club were studying and I mean, it hurts the kids too. I understand that the teachers are too, but having the kids grow up studying then through 3 meals a day and
Yeah.
all that, it was an eye-opening experience for me too, and I was thinking that teacher problem. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah. Everybody go home and thank a teacher, please.
My degree is actually early education.
Yes, I
And before COVID, I was like, yes, I want to be a kindergarten teacher. There's no way in this.
In the last year and a half or
I will
so.
not ever be a teacher, but I will finish it. But I will not do it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
And that stinks. Society loses in that case, right? And that, to me, that's evidence again for social reproduction theory being maybe at the moment a little bit more accurate. If this were like a question on an exam, hey, describe the two theories and tell me which one is the right one or whatever. As long as you backed up, why you think it's this one or why it should be both or why whatever, that would be fine. There's clearly not a right answer today on this one. It's a philosophical kind of question. Anything else for now? Yeah.
Yes and no. How fun is it to try to teach this specific topic?
Wait till we get to race next week.
Everything's gotta be a landmine.
The job has shifted over the last 10 years that I've been doing it here. I mean, yeah.
Constantly learning.
Yes, that's true. Boy, though, do I feel like my job is secure. Somebody's got to learn this stuff, right? So, fair point.
Well, you can almost feel the tension when you say certain things of, how do I say this without offending or upsetting somebody?
Yeah, and a lot of it shouldn't even be offensive or political, right? But that's changed again. Over the last decade, things have become more and more political, and it is tricky. As a social scientist, I try to just rely on what the evidence says and try to present just as much fact without, or when there is personal interpretation, I try to state that this is me here talking Gloria and not, sociology. But feel free to call me out if that changes. I would like to know if that isn't, if I'm not showing that line. But for now, how about a break? Whether it's an emotional one or just a bathroom one, I don't care. But when we come back, we will keep talking about inequality. The good news is our activity today is a video. We're going to watch a video, so it'll be low stakes, right? So let's come back at 2:30, if that's okay with everyone, and pick up. All right, see you guys in about 10 or 11 minutes.
I have the
well. So I'm not. Hi everyone, welcome back. So in the second half of class today, I want to continue talking about income and wealth inequality, and then we'll talk a little bit about why social mobility, moving around in social class, has been so difficult in the United States in particular. I did see on the break, there's some discussion in the chat, and I've only been talking largely about the United States, right? And when you look at global inequality, the things we're quibbling over, $15 an hour to $17 an hour, that's, when you compare that to what's happening in places, a lot of places around the world, there's a huge gap there as well. So I'm not meaning to neglect that. We will talk about globalization a little bit, but most of what I'm talking about today is largely the U.S. So anyway, we'll continue that, and then we'll do our activity for today at the end. So, okay, so the first thing is talking about the difference between wealth and income. So largely, when we were talking about social reproduction, we were talking about inequality, but I wasn't specifying what kind, where the inequality was coming from, what dollars it was talking about. Because there's a difference between someone's income and their wealth. So a lot of, when you see studies or surveys or data on inequality, they're often on income inequality. So a person's income is probably what you think of, right, which is the money that they receive through employment or investments. So anything that's literally coming in to your bank account, right, is income. That's different than wealth. A person's wealth is the value of all of their assets. That does include bank accounts, but it can also include property, or vehicle, or stocks, or other financial products. It's the value of all those assets minus any debt a person has. So, you can have a really high income, you can make $1 million a year, right, but have very little to no wealth. If you win the lottery, right? If you're a poor person who wins the lottery, you suddenly have a lot of income but no wealth. Or those families that have had generations of money are very, very wealthy but nobody works, right? So there's no income or very low income but a lot of wealth. Usually income and wealth go, if you have a lot of one, you tend to amass a lot of the other. But so wealth is more stable within families and across generations, because wealth can be perpetuated, it can be passed on, right? So wealth, when one person gets wealth, they can choose to give that wealth to another person or more people, upon their death, for example, in the form of a will or a inheritance or whatever. And so families tend to amass wealth over time. But if you don't have any wealth, you can't pass it on, which means your next generation can't have it either. And so that's where we start to get wealth inequality. Income inequality is just people not making the same amount, right? That's the, who should make minimum wage and who shouldn't, blah, blah, that's an income issue. Wealth is a bit more, just in general. There's a bit more of a problem with it. There's a bit more of an inequality gap. So wealth inequality, one way to visualize, or not visualize, but one way to picture this. The richest 1% of people in the world own almost half of the world's wealth. So if you piled up all of the wealth that was available on the planet, all of the money, but also all of the property value and stocks and whatever, and cut it in half, all of that goes to 1% of people on the planet, right? And most of those people are in Europe and North America, or the major cities in Asia, Beijing and Tokyo and other financial areas. But if you look at the United States, we also have a severe wealth inequality gap. The richest 10% of the U.S., so what is that, 30 million people? So it's still a lot of people, but they own 80% of the wealth in the United States. The richest 10% of the U.S. owns more than 3/4 of everything. And maybe it's hard to like decide if that's too much or too little. So just for comparison, the top 10% of Canadians, they own half of Canada's wealth, not 80%, half. The top 10% of Belgians own 43% of Belgium's wealth, and the top 10% of Japanese own about 40% of Japan's wealth. So the next three wealthy countries, or three more very wealthy countries, the top 10% of their population does not own nearly as much as ours. If you're more of a visual person, and I will not be testing you, by the way, on an exam, I would not ask you for these statistics. I don't think that statistics stick in people's brains very well, and so I wouldn't, I'm not going to test you on how many, what percent of the wealth of Belgium is owned by 10% of the population. Not interested in you memorizing that, it's fine. But if you're a more visual person and these numbers maybe aren't as clear, this is the United States, so we're back to the U.S. All the wealth of the U.S. is in this pie, right? And what percent of that wealth is owned by each wealth group? So if you count just the orange and the blue, right, which is most of the pie, that's the top 5% of the U.S. And then if you include the green, then that means we're up to the top 20% of the U.S. Most people in the U.S., 8 out of 10 people in the U.S. together own 10% of the wealth. There is so much wealth in the United States owned by so few people, right? Almost everyone in the U.S. has to share this pie slice, right? While 20% of the U.S. gets to divide up the rest. And that was 2016, so I haven't seen one more recent, but I'm sure it hasn't gotten better. Not to mention, this is a problem that perpetuates itself. Think about this, right? The kinds of assets that wealthy people have are things that appreciate in value. They increase in value over time, right? While the kinds of assets that poorer people have tend to be things that depreciate, that lose value over time. So wealthy people have things like real estate, or art, or antiques, or stocks and bonds that mature and things like that. If poorer people have any assets, they tend to be things like a car, which of course loses value the minute you drive it off the lot and every day after that. They might own things like furniture or other material goods that also depreciate in value and quality over time, right? So not only do we have rich people and poor people, but we have rich people being able to get richer just by standing still, right? And poor people who are getting poorer just by standing still. I already mentioned this on a previous slide, that wealth is perpetuated generationally, meaning wealth is able to be passed on from one generation to another. I'm not proposing that we should strip wealth away from everybody when someone dies and it just goes back into the pot for everyone else. But there has to be something between that and it being hoarded, within 1% of people in the United States, right? So something in between, maybe we could figure out. Yeah, Brian.
It's almost, at least last I checked, it was also cash itself appreciated faster than the value at this point. So.
It can, yeah.
At least recently it's been doing that, for sure.
Right.
So even if you put money into savings, your value is depreciating more than probably the interest.
Absolutely. And yeah, you can't get a good interest rate on a regular bank account anymore, right? You used to be able to just put your money in savings and it would at least grow a little bit. Now you have to have a money market account or something else, and yeah. Absolutely. Even standing still, you're losing, right? And many people in the United States, so all of us that are sharing that, 10% of the pie or whatever, most of us, that's not true, I'm not saying most, just many, I don't know the exact number here, but many people in the U.S. owe more than the value of what they own, right? And that's called negative wealth. Sometimes you may hear people say, I'm underwater on my house or my mortgage or whatever, meaning the value of the property they have is worth less than what they owe on it, right? So wealth has become a huge issue in the United States. Sure, it's a problem when people don't earn, fair pay for their jobs. That's absolutely, income inequality is a problem. But when you look at it from the point of view of wealth, the gap between the people at the top and the people at the bottom is even bigger. So to go back to the idea of income, right, I do have some data to show you about income inequality. According to the Congressional Budget Office, income inequality has been increasing in the United States since the late 1970s. So since 1979, the after-tax income of the top 1% has increased 242%. That may not mean anything to you, but I'm going to put another statistic up and then we'll compare them. During that same time period, since 1979, the after-tax income of the bottom 20% of the U.S. grew by less than 79%. So in other words, over the last 40 years, right, the top 1% have increased how much they earn every year. They more than, doubled it, right? 240% increase in what they earn every year. During the same time, most of the bottom 20%, their incomes have increased less than 79%. This barely makes up for inflation, right? And that's why we saw minimum wage that didn't change for 30 years, or not 30, but a long time, even though the cost of living and the cost of goods and services has been going up and up and up. Income has not been growing at the same rate. And so maybe you've seen memes online where somebody says, like, oh, when I went to college, I paid, $700 for tuition or whatever, and they figure out what that would cost in today's dollars and all that, right? That has significantly benefited the people at the top and not the people at the bottom. So in other words, increasing that gap between the rich and the poor. So income inequality can be about numbers. It can be about money, about income and wealth. But there is another aspect to inequality that sociologists like to look at, and that's the idea of social mobility. Social mobility. And like its name says, social mobility is the ability to move up or down in the stratification system, in our hierarchy. Right? So if you live in a society where it's possible to move up or down, you live in a society with social mobility. If you remember, slavery was a system where you could not change your status, right? That there was no social mobility in slavery. But in a class system, at least theoretically speaking, we have the ability to move, right? So there's a few ways that we can measure mobility: intragenerational and intergenerational. Intragenerational mobility is where a person moves up or down in social class within their own lifetime. So, Brian, you were talking earlier about being born in a lower class, and throughout, or at least your mom's time, you worked your way up, right? That is intragenerational mobility. We also sometimes measure mobility by comparing one generation to the one before them, so like comparing individuals to their parents, and we call that intergenerational mobility. Comparison of the social class of individuals to that of their parents' generation. So for example, I fall kind of into the Gen X, or maybe right on the border of millennial, but the Gen X generation. My parents are baby boomers, right? And so to measure like the social class that I find myself in as compared to the one my parents did would be intergenerational mobility if I'm of a higher class than they are. And so this really, we started measuring this way, especially around the Great Depression and the era shortly after, right? So the Great Depression, of course, had people very low on the wealth and income scale, And when what was the name of that generation? The greatest generation, right? The ones that then fought in World War II. Their kids were the baby boomers, right? And baby boomers did much better economically than their parents did because there was not a Great Depression, right? And on average, the children of baby boomers did better than their parents, right? And then the millennial generation is actually the first generation in a while that hasn't, across the board, done better than the generation before them. I'm not blaming them for it, it's the circumstances that didn't allow for it, but that type of looking at measurement would be intergenerational mobility, right? As opposed to just looking at a person and how they move. So just different ways of looking at it. And what we've seen with these two measures is that during most of the 1900s, intergenerational mobility increased. Right? That's what I was saying. Generations were doing better than their parents for most of the 1900s, most of the 20th century. But since about 1980, which is roughly when the millennial generation starts, right? If you look at, whatever demographics, intergenerational mobility has decreased. So for, almost 100 years or for 80 years or so, it was increasing, and now it's decreasing. And there is a chart in the book to describe what you're looking at. Sorry, hang on. So, sorry, that was me. Okay. So what we have here is the year a person was born. Okay, so 1980 is, let's see, where is this? 1980 is right here. And we have the percent of income, of their parents' income that a person made, right? So it's the percent of people who made more than their parents. So back in, 1940, 90% of people made more money than their parents, right? And that steadily declined and declined and declined, even, I guess it leveled off a little in the 60s and 70s, but then continued on a downward path. So over time, people are not making more than their parents.
So,
Mallory, go ahead.
So I have a random thought. Do you think that could be at all possible because more women and non-white men are in the workforce more?
Earning less, or earning not as high a salary? Is that what you're thinking? Or?
So they're taking away from the white men.
Oh, I see. I think there could be position or the compensation or income could be affected by that. Definitely. Sorry, I lost my verbal ability just then. But yes, is my answer to your question. Yeah, Brian.
I think another thing is World War II and the amount of Americans that died.
Mm-hmm.
Created a huge economic opportunity that would last for decades, especially considering the amount of people that died in Europe and this devastation of industry across the world.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely greatly impacted why more Americans would make more money to start with.
Right.
And now slowly fade away. And then I think that plateau you see in the 70s is the deaths of Americans in Vietnam and the amount of people being pulled away from the draft and things like that. So that creates better economic opportunities for people that stay behind.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, now there's nothing, we're not seeing the benefits. The world's caught up.
Right. Oh, maybe the COVID deaths will help. I'm so sorry. No, I shouldn't even joke. I actually feel really bad that I just said that. I apologize.
But sadly, that's actually probably true, is eventually we'll see a world benefit of some economic improvement after COVID. Because the number of people sadly who have died, people will have better opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of that's going to be countered by the fact that certain businesses closed,
right,
and lost, and
in certain industries like restaurants and entertainment, and
But those things will grow back eventually if and when things clear up as far as these protocols and giving better opportunities. Those opportunities will be open. And we'll see some economic growth again. This chart will probably spike for a while and then continue until the inequality is kind of balanced out.
Mm-hmm.
That's.
I I do find myself frustrated that there's not more of the graph on that side.
It'd be horrible, I would imagine, during the Great Depression.
Right. So, yeah. But it would be, a little more context there might be nice. But I think there's a lot of, possible explanations. The role of women and marginalized groups, the role of loss of workforce, right, are both absolutely playing a part of this, for sure.
I just want to make sure I'm reading.
Yep.
This year, people were born and then they did it, like the people born in 1970s is better than their parents.
About 60% of people born in 1970 did better than their
So we're
parents.
going off of like the COVID thing, so like theoretically, people born in like 20 or 21. Okay, so just making sure I was
Right, so if this continued out into like 2021, it would be people born this year or next year, babies right now, if they end up doing better than their parents. And if their parents were affected by, like having a restaurant or something like that, right? Yeah, so we would expect this to go up, start climbing back up like that.
Okay.
Yep, good question. Okay, so that was inter, comparing children to their parents, right? Then there was intra, where we just look at a person and what they can achieve in their lifetime. And that has also been going down since the 1980s. What this tells us, so intra-generational mobility has also been decreasing. This tells us that people are less likely to move up in an income bracket throughout their lives. And it doesn't even matter what class they're in. I'm not saying that poor people can't move up to middle class. I'm saying even rich people can't move up an income bracket from what's where they are, right? That like most people are stuck where they are in their lifetime. And so this is an issue that is important, should be important, not just to the poor and not just to the middle class, but to the wealthy as well. This is something that affects you no matter what your class is. So the question, hopefully, that you're wondering is why? Right? We have maybe some answers to the why for intergenerational mobility. But why intra and why in general is mobility decreasing so much? And the book lays out a couple possible explanations. So I'll give you 1 second, finish writing, drink. Okay, so why has it decreased? The first one is something called neoliberal economic policies, which if you're not an economics person, you're like, oh God, this sounds like, math or economics. Don't panic. So basically, neoliberal means free market. So you notice how it kept saying since 1980 or 1979, things have shifted, right? Well, what happened in 1980 is Ronald Reagan was elected and implemented a whole bunch of economic policies, popularly known as Reaganomics. Maybe you've heard of that, right? And that's what these are, right? That's what these are. So these kinds of policies, I'm not going to test you on them, but are things like reduced corporate and wealth taxes, fewer government regulations, reduced workers' rights, things like that caused an increase in wealth and income among the rich and powerful. And then, the old saying goes, he said it would trickle down to the workers, right? Although we're still waiting for evidence that trickle down is trickling. But the idea here is like, in 1980, before the Reaganomics, kind of went into play, in 1980, the top individual tax rate was 70%, which is an insanely high number. So 70% of your income, if you were in the top tax bracket, went to taxes. Now, the top tax rate is 37%. And regardless of what you think it should be, I don't have a particular answer to that, but it got cut in half, right? So half as much money was going into the government from that tax bracket anyway. Another part of neoliberalism is, it's not just Reagan. I don't want to give one person the blame for all this, but that is the popular person who you can associate with these ideas. But Other things are part of neoliberalism too, like redistribution policies. These are programs that allow the government to move money and resources from one group or institution to another, and these policies have been reduced. So it used to be that like TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, right, that has been modified so many times that it provides fewer and fewer benefits than it was originally designed to, because the benefits from TANF were redistributed to the IRS or to, the I don't know, I don't think school systems or the healthcare systems, but to other places, right? And so, money often gets taken from those kinds of programs. And then, of course, redistribution also refers to tax loopholes where and deductions that favor wealthier people. So in 2015, 6 years ago, the top 1% of the population in the United States paid taxes on about 5% of their income. So Jeff Bezos and his buddies, right, they make billions, so let's just say $1 billion, right? They paid taxes only on 5% of that. The bottom 20% of the country, the people in the lowest classes and people in poverty, they had to pay taxes on 11% of their income. Not 5, 11. So they had to pay more taxes relatively than the Bezoses and the, I'm picking on him because I can't think, Bill Gates and Elon Musk, thank you, and yeah, those guys, right. And it's not just them, it's also a bunch of, investors that you don't even know their names and whatever. But the point is, right, these are things that have been benefiting the wealthy and really decimating the poor when it comes to wealth. Another reason social mobility might have decreased has to do with globalization. So we have developed as a world this global marketplace, right, a world economy. And part of that, because we have so many countries around the world working together and trading and exchanging goods and services, there's been internationally a push to have very few restrictions on trade, right? Because you don't want to step on any one country's laws or toes, so they just say, okay, we won't have any rules, right? And there are actually places on the planet, like islands makes it sound like a Dr. Evil, lair kind of thing, but there are patches of land on the planet that are not subject to any country's rules or regulations. They're only subject to the rules of the corporation that owns the land. Like, that shouldn't happen, right? They're called maquiladoras, free trade zones, maybe you've heard of those. But anyway, with very few restrictions, we have the potential for corruption, right? And so multinational corporations end up getting more and more power. And so like Amazon, like Tesla, but not just those. And so the individual, the average Joe kind of person, middle, lower class, right, they don't play on the global scale of finance and industry and economics. But they bear the brunt of these companies trying to make a little extra money, so they move the production overseas so they can pay lower labor costs. That results in losses of jobs here, which is called outsourcing, right? That's the term for that. So companies can operate wherever labor is the cheapest, or wherever taxes are the lowest, or wherever regulations are lax. Outsourcing. Also, we got two more reasons why social mobility has decreased. So another explanation for why social mobility, people are less able to move around in social class than they once were, is automation and technology. So like you can think about it as robots replacing, people, workers, and that's part of it. Some new technology has replaced human labor, But the rest, even the technology that doesn't replace human labor, that kind of technology requires advanced training and skill to use, right? So it used to be in the United States, the average person out of high school could work in a factory, right? They could do the manufacturing. That was a high-paying, decent job, right? Well, with outsourcing and all that kind of stuff, a lot of manufacturing has gone away in the United States. And so the main jobs that are available now are technologically related, right? And if you're a base level worker, chances are your job has already been replaced by automation. And so it's only the higher up technology kinds of positions that exist, but those require, degrees or certifications or trainings to achieve. And so the average low skilled worker doesn't have a factory to go to, doesn't have the training to stay in the manufacturing industry, and so that's why we used to think of McDonald's as a high school kid's job or a part-time job, but now it's filled by adults full-time because that's the job that low-skilled workers are forced to go to. Retail and food service and things that, again, we traditionally thought of as stepping stone jobs, right, are now full-time careers for people because the options have shrunk so much. And finally, the last one is the decline of unions. So labor unions, we just had Labor Day on Monday. Labor unions are organized to bring workers together to fight for better wages, benefits, or working conditions. When union membership is high, workers' rights are respected, wages are higher, workers report being happier. But over the last 40 or so years, labor union participation has decreased significantly, about 50%, kind of got cut in half. So I will put up a graph, but then I'll put this back up for anyone who has to finish writing. So back in the early 80s, about 20% of workers were unionized, and we're down to about 10%, in the last 5 years or so. Which doesn't look like a lot, but again, it got cut in half. So union membership has decreased. So those are some of the book's explanations for why it's harder to move in your social class, primarily move up. You can still move down pretty easily. All you have to do is, stop working or trying to get any money. But increasing your social mobility has been difficult. Questions or comments? All right, so the last thing I want to talk about for today is the social problems that lead to or come out of inequality. And there's one last section in the lecture after this, but I think what I'll do, probably because we got a little behind with the tech glitch, is I'll probably just post those couple slides and to save us time, and you can fill them in if you want to and read them if you want to, but we'll get there. That's in a few minutes. Because I don't want to keep us, all after me. Anyway, let's talk about a couple social problems that lead to inequality, right? These are bigger social issues that have an effect on inequality. So racism is one, right? Racism is a social issue, right, where discrimination and prejudice against people because of their race or ethnicity. The existence of racism and the history in the United States of racial discrimination in the distant past as well as the not so distant past has created structural barriers to economic opportunities for people of color. Hispanic and Black full-time workers earn about 74 to 79% of what full-time white workers make. Doesn't matter what job you're in, right? Just across the board of everybody who works, full-time employees, white employees earn 100 cents or $1. Hispanic and Black full-time employees earn about 75 to 79 cents for every $1. And Hispanic and Black employees earn less, I just said that, but I gave you the dollars. Hispanic and Black employees earn less than their white and Asian counterparts. when it comes to earning and income inequality, Asian Americans and people of Asian descent have traditionally not been affected quite as much as other marginalized groups because of the kinds of jobs being done by Asian Americans have been higher paying in general as compared to some of the more manufacturing or labor-intensive jobs done by Blacks and Hispanics. Sexism also stinks and is part of the problem. Even in 2021, women still earn 80% of what men earn. That is not an old-fashioned statistic. That is this year or last year, based on all full-time year-round employees. And part of that reason that women still continue to make less than men is not because there's like one guy standing there being like, oh, you're a man, I'm going to give you $1, or oh, you're a woman, I'm going to give you 80 cents. That is illegal, technically, right? That's a violation of equal opportunity employment. But what's happening is that women are more likely than men to take time off from work, unpaid time off, right? For childcare, maternity or pregnancy. Women are more likely than men to take time off if like the kids are sick, right? Like they take their time off. Those kinds of things eat into your annual pay if you're not getting paid for your time off, and so that contributes to some of it. Another thing is the kinds of jobs that women do tend to be concentrated in like the service professions, right? Like helping or customer service or things like that. Whereas the kinds of jobs that men do are a bit more, on average, more specialized and slightly more higher paying. So, think of like the old stereotype of a male doctor and a female nurse, right? The kinds of jobs that men did were higher paying, females lower paying. Excuse me. Another issue from the larger society that affects income inequality and wealth inequality is educational inequality. So here is income inequality by education. Among people who have no high school degree, their median weekly income is like $600, and the higher your education level, right, a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree, increases your earning potential. I think you all know this. Chances are that's why a lot of you are in school, because of the fact that there is a big gap between here and here, and all that takes, roughly, is a 4-year degree. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to get. You're all working hard on it, I know, but full-time employees who didn't graduate high school earn less than half of what someone who with a bachelor's degree earns, right? And so we know that education has a huge impact on income. And so if our educational system is unequal, it's going to produce people whose incomes are unequal, right? You see how that works logically, right? If the schooling system's broken, it's going to produce people who are stuck in different places. So we will talk more about this when we get to the chapter on education. But neighborhood and regional inequalities exist for K-12 schools. So you know that wealthier neighborhoods have higher property taxes, which means more money going to the school for whatever things the school might need, field trips and new textbooks and whatever, right? Whereas poorer neighborhoods, lower property values, lower taxes, less funding for the school. But this applies, that's K-12, but even in higher ed, we know, tuition costs have been skyrocketing for our students due to reduced government support. So colleges and universities have had to raise tuition. When I applied to undergrad, the school I really wanted to go to was a private school, and it was called Union College in upstate New York. And their tuition and room and board altogether had just crossed the $30,000 threshold for a year. And my parents laughed me out of the house. We are not paying for that. The state school was $4,000 or something, right? That was 20-something years ago. That $30,000 would be great if that was your tuition for a year at a private school now. Amazing. So just in that time, just in that 20 years, right, we've gone to like, almost 6 figures for some programs at like Harvard and whatever. So not quite that high, but getting there.
So you tag on your books and
Yeah, and if you want to, room and board, and those costs have gone up too, right? So yeah, absolutely. Once you account for all the fees and extras.
my sister's school went bankrupt last year.
Is that St. Joe's?
No, she was going to after Renaissance.
Yeah.
She's at a new school this semester, and she's realizing like how grateful she was for all the things that she didn't have to get a car, she didn't have to pay rent, she didn't have to pay. I think it was like $550 this year. How
Yeah.
She ran outside of Boston, and she needs her car because she's trying to replace it.
Yeah.
There's no place to park. She's like, well, I'm going to cover $3.
And yeah, all those extras, they start to add up very quickly. Absolutely.
That's kind of, it's not crazy.
Absolutely. And not just the like dollar amount cost of school. Obviously, you all know there's also a time cost, right? If you're in school, you're not working. So you're not only are you spending money on tuition, but you're not earning money in a job while you're sitting in a classroom, right? Don't worry, guys, it'll come back later in the future, I promise. But schools, going to good schools or having access to education in general, whether it's good or less than good, can provide you with things like social capital, which is like your social connections. Have you ever heard somebody say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? Half the time going to college is not just about learning facts and figures, it's about forming connections to people who can help you in your social life, right? Someone, to help you get a job, or someone to help you meet the right person and all that kind of stuff. If you aren't in school or aren't going to school, you miss out on some of that capital. There's also cultural capital, which is like that's the knowledge and the information, but it's also stuff like manners, like knowing which fork to use at a fancy restaurant. Like that is a piece of knowledge that is value in our society. Even if it's silly and dumb and who cares what fork you use, like that, but it matters, right, in that situation to certain people. And that's the kind of thing you learn in going to college or going to school more likely than elsewhere. Questions or comments about issues with education? Like I said, we are going to keep talking about this more when we get to the chapter on education. This is just sort of pointing out its direct connection to economics, right? If you suffer in the education system, that bleeds over into your economic life as well. All right, so how about social problems that are caused by inequality? Health problems are one example. You don't have to write all of this down, like these are just examples. I want you to write the thing in bold, health problems, but you don't have to write this extra. But people in poverty and people on the lower end of the economic spectrum tend to face increased mental health burdens and at the same time have a lack of access to quality health care. And so health problems are very significant among the poor. Another issue that inequality can lead to is human rights violations, meaning like a loss of your civil liberties or representation. Some people argue that if you look at, our politicians, right, in government, they are elected to represent certain areas, right? But almost every politician makes significant money and is wealthy, right? And so there are groups worldwide that think that the representatives in the U.S., for example, are not actually representing their constituents because they're wealthy and their constituents are poor, and how can they represent them when they don't know who they are? And that leads them to say that means that the poor people are effectively living in a country where they don't have representation. I mean, that's like a democratic ideal that's being violated. And so I know this seems extreme to say poverty is a human rights violation, but when you think about it, there is a logical argument to be made there. Another is the loss of contributions to society. We actually talked about this when we talked about the social reproduction theory, that talented people from lower classes may not be able to achieve their potential just because they aren't given the opportunity. Right? So, there could be a young child from the south side of Chicago who is a violin virtuoso, but if he or she is never given a music class or allowed to touch an instrument, how would they ever be able to learn and hone their talent and give it to the world, right? That kind of that sounds like a movie, right? Tragic movie, but
that's why the rich like having red zones in all these states. The poor stay poor. They don't give them the opportunity to get the education to get out of these poor areas.
the more non-poor people there are, theoretically, they'll take away what the rich people have, right?
Absolutely.
Or at least that's the fear, yeah. Did you know that income inequality can actually affect the environment? In places with higher income inequality, there is increased consumption of goods and products and resources, and an increased depletion of natural resources. Countries and areas with higher income and wealth inequality actually deplete natural resources faster. Part of that has to do with, when you have a place that has such rich people, right? The concept of like resources being finite is not something they're familiar with. Like they've just never had to deal with, boundaries, right? And so there's an increase in this like, oh yeah, we're clear cutting forests, but they're in another poor country, so it doesn't matter. We can keep moving. Who cares if our company is clear cutting? We're making money, right? You don't have to look at it. You don't have to worry about it. And so a lot of times there's an increased consumption of resources that has a negative environmental effect. Almost done. Increased violence is another one. Places with greater income inequality have higher rates of violent and property crimes. In fact, if you look at these are the top, 20? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 15, 22. Wealthy countries, and their amount of income inequality, right? So not a lot of income inequality. So Japan is famous for having not a huge amount of income inequality, whereas the U.S. is up here, right? High income inequality. And this is their crime rates, right? So again, Japan, very low income inequality and very low crime. Now, it's not a perfect correlation. Obviously, it, jumps around. But I think it's pretty clear that the trend goes in that direction, right? That the more income inequality you have, the more violent and property crime rates that occur. These are homicides, not just not property crimes, but. So there's a correlation, I did not say causation, but a correlation between crime and income inequality. Government instability, and this is something we were talking about with when you guys asked me, like, what do you see happening in the future, and like, Davis Moore or social reproduction. The more income inequality we have, the greater the chance for corruption and polarization. Think of income inequality like a rubber band, and like the more we stretch the rich and the poor separate, it gets tauter and tauter, and eventually it's going to snap, right? Eventually we're going to hit the point as a nation where it breaks our, the straw that, I'm having too many mixed metaphors here, but the straw that breaks the camel's back, the rubber band snaps, whatever. At some point, the haves and the have-nots get so separated that it causes corruption and can lead to tension, acts of violence, terrorism, anti-government demonstrations. Democracies can devolve into dictatorships or whatever very quickly when there's such income inequality. That is what happened in Cuba. That is what happened in Venezuela and a lot of Central America. And other places, in other times. And finally, social income inequality and wealth inequality can cause individual problems. People as individuals struggle more when there's more inequality. They struggle emotionally, they struggle economically, they can struggle physically, the greater the more income inequality there is. Questions or comments about any of these problems caused by inequality? All right, so what I'd like to do, if you have the lecture outline, the next section is solving social problems, and there are 2 slides, or three slides for that. What I'd like to do is skip those, and I will post those 3 slides to Brightspace so everybody can see what was on them. But I want to move us to our participation assignment today because it involves video, and I want to make sure we get some of it played for you so you don't have to watch it on your own time. So what I would like to do today is explore the idea of poverty a little further. And so what we're going to watch today are 2 segments from a documentary called People Like Us, Social Class in America. And the first video is called Tammy's Story. It's about a single mother of 4 who's on welfare for years and years and years, and eventually decided she did not want to be on welfare anymore for emotional reasons. And so she gets a job and is struggling to keep her family together and to get along with her son, who is embarrassed by her low status. So I'm going to play this video clip. If you go on Brightspace, hang on one second, I'll show you where this is, to today's folder. Come on. It's probably asleep. Today's folder and today's participation assignment. Oh, because I'm moved. I'm going to show these 2 videos, but I did put links to them here if you want to watch them again or on your own time, or if we don't quite squeeze them in by class time ending. And you can see there's like 4 or 5 questions that I'm asking you about this film we're going to watch. What does it mean to be at the bottom? What is the conflict between Tammy and her son? So the first video took place in 2001, I believe. And so we're going to watch that, and then we're going to talk. And then the second video took place in 2013, so like 12 years later. So we're going to get to see where she is, make predictions about where you think she's going to end up, and then we'll see like what happened to the family. So the first video is here. There's no sound yet. That's on purpose.
I'm embarrassed a little bit about living here because the trailer and the yard and stuff, it's all messed up. Mom likes the place. I like the place too, but I don't like want all my friends and stuff to know where I live at because they're like class up from us and stuff.
This is my living room, and he does clean house when I'm at work. He tries to help out and everything. I appreciate that, okay? But things I don't like him to do is move things where I can't find them.
I don't like to introduce my mom to a lot of people because I don't like for them to see her image, what she looks like. She don't fix herself up, and that's what people look at, their appearance, not how they act.
And this here is my kitchen. May not look like much, but it's something. And you see I don't have a furnace, which I like to have one. I know where it went.
Tammy Crabtree and her 4 children cling to the bottom rung of the social ladder in this small Ohio town. But even down here, they're not ready to be counted out just yet.
All this junk and stuff, I don't know where to put it, and my mom or nobody would tell me, so I just threw it over there in a big pile.
All junk. You got it going down on top of the bank. Junk all over there. Clothes, burnt things. Messed up.
Why don't you want to clean it up?
Lazy.
Just plain simple study.
I like to sit and be on the couch potato. That's all I know.
My mom she won't lift a hand either. I get on her all the time, and she says, all you can do is move and stuff, and I go, I don't want to move, but I want you to straighten up and start acting. We do argue all the time. A lot. That's all me and my mom does.
I was on welfare 18 years. And now, I work at Burger King, and I'm trying to make a living, make it home for the kids. It ain't my fault because I'm poor. I grew up poor. My dad worked hard. Worked 27 years on county engineer, trying to make a living for 22 kids. And it ain't easy. You know, I was proud of my dad. He'd be proud of me now, you know, for just trying. Kids, I'm going to work. See you after a while. I walk to work 10.5 miles because I don't have a car, don't have a license. Even when I'm walking to work or something, someone holler, "Hey, trashy bitch, what are you doing?" I'm just walking to work. All I want is a life right in the happen. But right now, I'm not, because the way people treat me, the way my own kids treat me. Morning.
Anybody in here?
My friends think I should stay at home, take care of the kids, and throw welfare. I'm hoping to go to college and be a school teacher. That's been my goal from the time I was 5 years old up until now.
Sometimes I am embarrassed by mom her, because she wears that Burger King outfit every day. I mean,
No, I don't.
I have never seen her like go to a real nice restaurant and wear not that Burger King outfit. It's either the shirt or the pants, or it's both. She wears it constantly, but it's different outfits, but it's the same damn outfit. Sorry if I use that word.
My son thinks he's a high class preppy. Yeah. Yeah. He's better than his brother.
This is my brother Bo. He dresses like this compared to this. And I don't like how he dresses because that's why I don't hang out with him. I don't talk about him or anything. People say he's my brother again. No, I don't know him. But when he dresses better and stuff, I'll walk around with him. And me and my friend over here, come here. Me and Josh, the only way we walk around with him is if he starts looking good, and we help him dress good and comb his hair and like make him look better. And
Matt thinks he's in a different class. Really, he's in the same class I am. He's trying to prove to his friends that he's in third class. But I am different.
right here, I got like 30 or 40 awards, and I got this little. You got like presidential awards, and I got school athletes awards. Yeah.
What is the best brother that she would like to be?
Poplar. I'm gonna go to college. Like for lawyer, you have to go to 4 to 6. I go the 4-year term to be a basic thing. In architectural design, it only takes 2 years in college. So I might go down here to Shawnee or Hocking College, somewhere around in there, and get a little school going on. Because I know I ain't no Harvard or anything like that.
There's my car.
wiring somewhere. Can't use my lights. I need tires. And I've been trying to get someone to fix it where I can get on the road. You know. I just basically need to get things going. You know. Get my kids going. They just run to their friends and everything. I don't know what else to do.
Okay. So I also keep coughing, excuse me. And I'm using a hanky. Just maybe jotting down what your predictions are about their future before watching the second video. I want to see how long it is if we have time to watch it. I don't think we do. Is that 16 minutes? Or 10? Sorry, 10 minutes. I guess we do. It's going to push us right to the end. But so think for a minute. Any thoughts about where you think they will be in 10 years or 12 years? If we were looking at the Davis-Moore hypothesis, that would tell us, one prediction, right? Whereas the social reproduction theory might predict something else. Any thoughts about which way you're leaning? Sorry.
Honestly, I kind of think he's so motivated to go to school and just I think this happens a lot with families. If my parent was struggling, I think it would motivate me to do better, I guess, in a way. It depends, but yeah, I think he's motivated to really.
I'm so sorry, you guys.
So, the mom's blood of 22 siblings. That's a lot.
We were talking about inter and intra-generational mobility, right? And
move up when you're.
I think that he made it because he seems to be extremely motivated. And I think that he can see all around him, is that what I want to be? He might not be going to Harvard, but he's going to go somewhere. He has the tenacity, and it breaks my heart when I look at his mother. She had all the potential, and yet life just shut her up.
Yeah.
It's divorce, all those things that happen every day to each and every one of us. I could have been a Tammy.
Yes, any one of us could.
Any one of us. But, that same motivation that man brought us back to where we were.
I apologize for coughing, but yes, Mimi, I think you are correct.
And because if you look at us, the immigrants, we don't come here to live in welfare. We don't come here to we come here to live better, give a better education for our children.
Absolutely.
And that's what Matt has. Matt has something that's going to take us.
Absolutely. So I
I
apologize.
wonder what kind of childhood she had, seeing as you can see her get so emotionally happy in the moment where she thinks her dad would be so proud of her just for trying.
So I'm going to start this because of the coughing, because of time, but I appreciate what people are saying, and I apologize for coughing over you. I am okay, but... So here is the second video. There are going to be some clips from the first video in it, so don't, you're not having a stroke or anything. Right back. I'm just going to cough in the hallway.
I'm embarrassed a little bit about living here because the trailer and the yard and stuff, it's all messed up. Mom likes the place. I like the place a little bit too, but I don't I don't like want all my friends and stuff to know where I live at, because they're like class up from us and stuff.
This is my living room. And he does clean house when I'm at work. He tries to help out and everything. I appreciate that, okay? But things I don't like him to do is move things where I can't find. I was on welfare 18 years. And now I work at Burger King. And it ain't my fault because I'm poor. I grew up poor. My dad worked hard. He worked 27 years on county engineer, trying to make a living for 22 kids. And it ain't easy. You know, I was proud of my dad. He'd be proud of me now, you know, for just trying. I walk to work, 10.5 miles, because I don't have a car, don't have a license. Even when I'm walking to work or something, someone will holler, "Hey, trashy bitch, what are you doing?" I'm just walking to work.
Good morning. Is everybody in here?
My friends think I should stay at home, take care of my kids, and throw welfare. I'm hoping to go to college and be a school teacher. That was my goal from the time I was 5 years old up until now.
To be on the screen.
Well, yeah, I look at it. So, I should have something better, a better house. You know. I don't want to look like I'm falling back. I want to look like I'm getting ahead, you know, trying to get somewhere. I may not have much money, but I keep a roof on my head, keep my bills paid. I don't ask for help. You know, I don't go around and say, "Hey, and you got $5 I can get." I don't do that. Because I know how hard it is to have a little bit of money, you know. I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm still working at Burger King. Only 20 minutes walk from here. Everybody looking, well, she's still walking some, but not as much. There's time I just like to walk. Just get things done. I feel like I'm free when I'm walking, you know. I feel like a bird that just been turned loose out of a cage. That's the way I feel sometimes, you know. Other time I just want to...
Sometimes I am embarrassed by mom, because she wears that Burger King outfit every day. I mean,
No, I don't.
I have never seen her like go to a real nice restaurant and wear not that Burger King outfit. It's either the shirt or the pants, or it's both. She wears it constantly, but it's different outfits, but it's the same damn outfit. Sorry to use that word.
I think he's in a different class. Really, he's in the same class I am. He's just trying to prove to his friends that he's in third class. But I know different.
I'm going to go to college. Like for lawyer, you have to go to 4 to 6. When I go to the 4-year term to be a basic thing. In architectural design, it only takes 2 years in college. So I might go down here to Shawnee or Hocking College, somewhere around in there, and get a little school going on. Because I know I ain't no Harvard material or anything like that.
When you're young, you're immature. As you get older, you start realizing what you can do and what you can't do. I did not finish college or high school. I only had 6 months of high school left. I had my daughter, and Mom said that I had to figure out a way to take care of her, buy diapers and stuff. my only option was I could keep going to school and do what I was supposed to, or I could step up and be a real man and take care of my kid. I probably could have did both, but back then I wanted one or the other, and I wanted my family, so I did that. If I look back on it now, would I change it? Yes, but you can't change the past. All you can do is hope for a better future.
This is my brother Bo. He dresses like this compared to this. And I don't like how he dresses because that's why I don't hang out with him. I don't talk about him or anything. People say he's my brother again. No, I don't know him. But when he dresses better and stuff, I'll walk around with him. And me and my friend over here, come here. Me and Josh, the only way we walk around with him is if he starts looking good, and we help him dress good and comb his hair and like make him look better.
Working now?
No, I'm out of work right now. I was self-employed, doing roofs, subcontracting on roofs, but I've been laid off for over 2 years now, going on 2 years. So, but I'll get back in there eventually.
Why were you laid off? Is that really hard to come by nowadays?
No, actually, to be honest with you, I got into drugs real bad, and I put the drugs before the work, and I didn't show up for work. I was doing the drugs. And
were you able to get to stop that little problem?
yes, I stopped that problem.
How did you do that?
But my mom's help and all the support around me. I mean, I got my family, and I got to think about them first. I mean, that's my number one priority.
Hey, bring him here. You want to pray with Grandma? Go pray with Grandma. Yeah, it's Grandma's boy. So, what are they doing, Grandma? You're getting on camera. Oh, ain't that so pretty? Give him a big smile. Give him a big, there we go. That Grandma's boy. I'm proud of me, because I'm going to achieve my goal before I drop dead or whatever, you know. That's what I want to do. Like $7.85 an hour.
That's minimum wage.
Yeah. But I should have been making almost $1 million, but they wouldn't give me the raise like they did a lot of them.
They asked me, do you think that you're going to fulfill your dream? I said, you're getting up in age, you're getting brittle, you had heart attacks. Do I believe she will? I said, no, I think that she's going to retire from working. Honest to God, but I do believe that you do got hopes and dreams and you hang on to them as hard as you can, and you do want that, but do I believe you're going to do it? No.
Well, I'll have a big surprise. Mom's going to do it. I want to make a better life for me, you know, like, I want to be that teacher I want to be. And this job just like training me all up and I can't get there. I get so frustrated. Sometimes I say, I hate my life. I don't know if anybody else felt like that before, the way I have felt. But I just want to be on top of the world sometimes. Not down here. I want to be so high up.
Okay.